that was our activity. I want to introduce our guest speaker, who is actually the president of the Miami Blue chapter. But that's not it. He's also the director of NABA. He's an advisory board member for the Tropical Audubon Society. So in that sense, he has a lot of care, compassion for wildlife, in particular birds and butterflies. And what's really great about this is that butterflies and birds are great umbrella species for other wildlife, right? So if you're protecting the shouse, you're basically protecting everything that lives in the habitat. So he's a part of that. And he's also an attorney. And so he earned his bachelor's at Rice University, and then his law degree from Columbia Law School. So welcome and thank you, Dennis. He's going to talk to us about rare and endangered butterflies of South Florida.
All right, thank you. Thanks, folks. Yeah, so you can see I make my living being a lawyer, but my real interest is conservation. So, and it's something that obviously South Florida really allows anyone to be, go as far as they want to, because it's a great location for, especially in the United States. Our place is different than almost anywhere else in the United States. And
Dennis, I'm sorry, could you get closer to the microphone, please?
yeah, butterflies are beneficiaries of, and we talked a little bit about this at our pre-meeting. It's all driven by plants. So plants are the key for birds and butterflies. And the reason they are here or not here is because they're, in the case of butterflies, they're host plant. So speaking of something that Jason mentioned, butterfly gardens in schools always tend to be pretty flowers because of what people want to see, but we all know what we should be planting are host plants, because that's what really drives the butterfly population. Yes, it's nice to have nectar plants, but it's the host plants that are the keys. Anyway, I thought I would just talk a little bit about rare endangered butterflies in South Florida, and I have not included all of them. In fact, unfortunately, the list is pretty long, especially the federally endangered list is not that long, but the rare list and what belongs on the endangered list is unfortunately long and getting longer. So let's get the next slide there. So we were talking about this before the meeting started. This is, of course, Chalcis swallowtail. And our organization, thanks to a lot of hardworking volunteers, including several of them here today, do surveys starting in April, May, June, which is unlike most of the butterflies we have in South Florida. This one does not fly year round. So with maybe an exception, we're not sure, but it's historically thought of as being univolting. That is, it lays.
You cut out completely.
Yeah, they can't hear you, Linda, so I'll repeat it. So univolting, although there's some evidence in literature that it may have a second season immediately following the May season. It's totally driven by rainfall. So the metropolis for Chalcis swallowtail is Elliott Key, although as you can imagine, extends down into Upper Key Largo. There is some controversy about how far south it occurred historically. They are trying to restore it on Lignum Vitae Key. It's not clear, at least to me, that it ever naturally occurred there, but who could be against it? It needs to be, it needs to have multiple locations. Arguably, it actually occurred here at Deering, landside, the only place. If you look at some of the records, there is some evidence that maybe it flew here at Deering. And Brickle Hammock, that's long gone. So there may be a chance to have Chalcis literally a few blocks away, so to speak. But the Great Brickle Hammock that occurred all the way up to the Miami River was another location for chouses. So univoltine, one brood a year, but there's some evidence that maybe it has two, a smaller round in August. And so we're going to be looking for that. Linda Evans and others sort of lead the. So what Linda said is to email her, Linda Evans, if you're interested in joining the survey. So they've been doing this for about a decade now. And population ebbs and flows. I recall not that long ago where only a handful, 4 individuals were seen. Yeah, and now, and then you'll have years where several hundred. Yeah, so upwards of 400 to 500. So it's right on the edge. It's the Caribbean. It's a Antillean species, and we're literally on the northern edge of its population geographic boundaries. But it's a great butterfly. Next slide. I just put this because rare and endangered, and then you have a relatively common butterfly that we talked about earlier, the giant swallowtail, just for comparison. And yes, Jason is pointing out one way to, those are pretty similar looking butterflies, but notice the tail, okay? And Jason will, I think he's got a pointer on that one. So maybe not. You notice the outline on the sweat chouses on the so the borders, right, are yellow, as opposed to if you look at the giants, you've got dots. So the configuration of the bands is a little different, but in flight and even when posing, not nearly as obvious. You'll see a little bit of dotting on that margin there, but it's the tails that people look at. Starting with, first of all, where is it? If you're sitting in your home in Coconut Grove and you see a large swallowtail, it's probably a giant swallowtail. It is highly unlikely that it is a Chouse's. But if you're sitting dodging mosquitoes in Elliott Key, it could very well be a Chouse's, depending on the time of year. So again, totally driven by rainfall. And May is sort of seen as the rainy season really begins sort of mid-May, late May, and that's when the Chouses are out and about. So that's one easy, I'll say easy comparison. Once you know what to look for, then they distinguish themselves. No. Okay, next slide. So one other swallowtail that occurs on Elliott Key, which is distinctive because you can see that it's not that easily confused. The Bahamian swallowtail, again, it's considered now a waif. It was on the endangered species list. I'm going to make up a date, 40 years ago, but were removed because the government thought that it's actually not a native swallowtail. They were wrong. It is, but it's gone. It's not on the endangered species list. It's routinely seen on Elliott Key. I'd say every year. It's reported, not in any numbers. And again, you could tell by its name, sort of where it's from. But Bahamian swallowtail is, again, if you're hanging out on Elliott Key, first of all, God help you. Because of mosquitoes, you're right in the time of mosquito. It's just unbelievable. I don't have my picture. I have a picture where I'm doing a butterfly count with the Salvato, Mark and Holly Salvato, and they took a picture of my back, and I'm wearing a tan shirt, and the back of my shirt is black. Okay, just solid mosquitoes. Okay, you learn you don't even swat them because then they just fly around your head. So you just yes. As far as I know, yes, but the giant has a more expansive. In other words, giants will lay on everything that the Chouses will lay on, but Chouses have a much smaller repertoire. Giants like citrus in particular. I mean, their favorite is a plant called yellow heart. As far as I know, the Bahamian lays on the same thing that the Chouses does. Torchwood, wild lime, and there's one other plant. Adam? Okay. Torchwood is historically its favorite, but it's a rare plant. And wild lime is a lot easier to grow and a lot more common. The Bahamians? Bahamian swallowtails were seen in numbers on Upper Key Largo. Yeah. Yeah. So they're ephemeral. I mean, there will be years when they're not seen, but I think the one other thing this points out is to find them, there have to be people out looking, right? And historically, May and June are not the time you're at Elliott Key or Upper Key Largo looking for, it's a difficult thing. Yes, Mary. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So for those who are zooming in, what Mary just said was that the Bahamians were seeing ovipositing on Torchwood at Fairchild. Oh, really? Interesting. All right. Next. Unfortunately, a butterfly species that has become extraordinarily rare. It is not on the endangered species list. It needs to be put there. Its populations have totally collapsed in South Florida. The so-called Florida white. It's almost exclusively a hammock, West Indian hammock species. You just don't see it anywhere, even in the deep hammocks. Not just the fringes, but the deep hammocks. Castle Hammock was one, maybe still is, one place. It's not guaranteed. I don't know that there's any guaranteed place in South Florida to see this. If you ask me, probably one of the best places is, of all places, the Botanical Garden, Key West Botanical Garden on Stock Island. That's a long drive to find the Florida white. Next slide, we'll find, just for comparison's sake, the Florida white and the Great Southern white. The antennae lobe, if you notice, the Great Southern white is sort of a bright emerald or aqua, depending on sort of the light. You'll see also there's a little bit of yellow on the forewing, underneath forewing of the Florida white. Again, the Great Southern white is very common. It's relatively seasonal, and it is migratory. So you'll see them flying offshore, actually. And in the Keys, you will have sometimes significant numbers if you look at butterfly counts. So the Great Southern white is, and it occurs all the way up the East Coast, as far as I know. Florida white, much more sedentary. I assume it occurred in numbers on Brickell Hammock when that was a hammock. Yeah, Linda points out that the flight is different, and that may have to do with, or maybe it's, like I say, one is relatively migratory, or at least a distance flyer. The other one's much more local. Florida white is, I'm not quite sure what the restoration efforts would be on that. I'm not sure what has caused the collapse of the population, but it is very hard to find. Great Southern white is uses a lot of different plants. It is, yeah, Florida white, Guyana plum. There may be one other one, but that's also a limiting feature because, yeah, limber caper, right? So, I mean, they're uncommon plants. They do occur. Limber caper is, if you don't have a limber caper, you should get one. It's a great plant to have in your yard. It's relative, obviously, to the Jamaica caper, but more viney. and the flowers are white. They don't turn colors, and they last one day. That's been my experience with them, but they are great attractions for. Actually, I think both whites lay on those. Okay, one more. All right, Florida purple wing, another Antillean butterfly that makes its living just barely into southern Florida, particularly the Keys, particularly Lignum vitae Key. These pictures were taken on Lignum vitae. They do occur in other places. They've been seen in Upper Key Largo. And again, it's, I think, just a case of having people out looking. Yeah, so what we're hearing, for those who can't hear Linda, a relatively large population or accounts of Florida purple-winged at Upper Key Largo as part of the Schaus census that's done. And a butterfly that typically lands wings closed will open up. You can see where it gets its name. Again, its metropolis is Lignum vitae Key. And yes, it has outlier populations, and that's encouraging because it's a concern anytime populations are limited to one small key. What could go wrong? We all know it's easy. If you haven't been to Lignum vitae Key, it's an interesting state park. It's accessible by boat only, and there is a little dock there, and it's a spectacular hammock. I mean, it's original, never logged or otherwise destroyed, and it is it's a beautiful place. So again, be prepared for mosquitoes. But assuming that you can overcome that, it's both from botany, because it's gets its name from what is one of the most common plants, the Lignum vitae plant. Florida purple wings lay on crabwood, as I recall. Yeah, crabwood. Another plant you should have in your yard. Easily grown, requires no care. Probably won't get a purple wing, but you never. Crabwood. For comparison, next is the dingy purple wing. And I just put a Florida purple wing there so you can sort of see a comparison. The dingy, as we're sitting in a place that is probably, I would say, the best place to find dingy purple wing in Florida is right here, right in Key Largo. So dingy purple wings, their host plant is certainly not the limiting feature, gumbo limbo. Okay, so it's sort of odd. Usually you think of, and we'll see some later, that are limited by just the availability of host plants. Dingy purple wing is not one. Okay, gumbo limbos everywhere. You can see it's unfortunate to have a common name like that because it makes it sound like something less than what it is, but it's not as the colors are not as robust as in Florida purple wing. But dingy is much more difficult to find. It's not as dependable, although the Deering Estate and Upper Key Largo are the two most reliable places. I've seen them down into Key West and into Fort Zachary Taylor there, which is very southern tip of Key West, dingy purple wings, but they're not guaranteed. I have to confess, I don't recall what the dingy purple wing uses as a host plant. Anybody? That's I'm sorry, gumbo limbo. I'm sorry about that. Go ahead. This is something butterfly we've talked quite a bit about because I will say, used to be common. It's become less common. It uses locust berry. Anything else, or only locust berry? A tea bush that's a non-native. Anyway, so Florida dusky wing, Male and female, you can see a dramatic difference in the upper surface. I don't know that I've ever seen a dusky wing with its wings closed. Okay. Uh, I'm sure there were photos, but they land always spread wing and known as spread wing skippers. Florida dusky wing, common in the pinelands, added hammock edges. Obviously, when we had a few 100,000 acres of pinelands in Dade County, there were a lot more dusky wings, not as many as there used to be. The next slide I put just so people would see the Florida dusky wing compared to the Horace's dusky wing females. And this is an ID challenge because lots of people say they've got Florida dusky wings and what they've got are Horace's. And it's hard to complain about. There's one butterfly species that has prospered because of humans and expansion has been the Horace's dusky wing because of its host plant, oak trees. And I'm going to overstate it, but I'll go ahead and make the statement. Oak trees now are much more common than they ever were in Dade County. They were never a common plant in Dade County. The further north you went, they became more common. The further south of the Miami River, less common. That doesn't mean they didn't occur. They did, but nothing like what we have now. There were not street trees. There were not oak trees. And the southernmost oak tree ever found was in Upper Key Largo. I think it's dead now, but historically, now they're planted up and down the Florida Keys. Yes. So the planting of oak trees, and I'm just looking, I can see them out the window right here. They don't belong here, but they're nice trees and they do support butterflies, and the Horace's dusky wing has taken advantage of that. So it's not that it's pushed the Florida dusky wing out. It hasn't. It's just confused people who think that the Florida dusky wing is a lot more common than it is, because it is not. I don't know, comments about the Florida dusky wing?
It's in your backyard.
Yeah, you can get the Horace's flies.
Dr. Whalen's wife was successful in attracting this to her backyard. So if you decide to plant locustberry and you live near of Pine Rockland, there's a good chance that it'll actually come into your backyard. So just consider that if you live around this area.
Yeah, everyone should have locustberry. Yeah, two things happen. You need to have locustberry, and it really helps to be close to a pine reserve, right? And then you will get expansion. Florida dusky wing is one of those. It's not protected in any fashion other than just being a generic protection. It's not on the endangered species list. It's one that is the populations are significantly reduced. Next slide. Now we get into the rarest of the rare. Okay, there are two butterfly species that are extraordinarily rare. There are several subspecies of the Bartram scrub hairstreak. They're all Antillean. This subspecies makes it into extreme South Florida. It is a pineland species overwhelmingly, and this is a case where, unlike the Horace's dusky, unlike the dingy purple wing, which is uncommon, but its host plant is extraordinarily common, this butterfly is strictly driven by its host plant, pineland croton. And without pineland croton, you will never see this butterfly. And even if you have scads of pineland croton, you probably will never see the butterfly. But having said that, not to be a downer, it still flies in remote places, relatively speaking, in southern Dade County, Navy Wells, the Richmond Pineland, which is where Metro Zoo is, Larry and Penny, and then in Everglades National Park. It used to occur in Big Pine Key on Key Deer National Wildlife Refuge. I think it has been extirpated from that, thanks to the mismanagement of that property by the federal government, frankly. Okay. Improper land management caused the population to collapse. It is a croton. It's driven by the availability of croton, and croton's driven by the availability of fire. And if you don't burn, you're not going to have historic croton. I mean, you can have it in your backyard, okay, and you can do what fire does, but you've got to have acres of it. So Bartram scrub hair streak is extraordinarily rare. And let's see the next slide. I think I gave maybe just some mix and match. Well, I decided to put Marshall scrub hair streak in. It's the one I think that maybe in closest in appearance. You see a bunch of lines and orange and white and all of that. Marshall's is not a common species itself, but extraordinarily more common than Bartram's. Marshall's is mostly a Keys. Maybe I have seen it. Actually, I've seen Marshall's on our Shark Valley count. So it makes it up to central Dade County. Or I guess that's western Dade County, but the Shark Valley, Everglades National Park, Bartram's you would never see there. But you can see hair streaks are hair streaks, right? Almost always inverted. The tails, or hence the hair streaks. And anytime somebody sees a hair streak, everyone gets excited. It's almost always a gray hair streak or something like red banded. But occasionally you will get Marshall's scrub hair streak and very rarely Bartram's. You have to go looking for Bartram's. It's not going to show up in your backyard. Next one there. And the rarest of the rare, okay, this makes Bartram's look downright common, is the Florida leafwing. The only reliable place to see it, and I use the word reliable in quotes, is Everglades National Park, Long Pine Key, maybe if you're lucky, very lucky. There's some, taxonomy is one of those places you go down the rabbit hole. There's always a fight among taxonomists whether this is in fact a separate species or whether it's related to an Antillean species. I think science says it is separate. It's barely hanging on. It used to fly in Key Deer National Wildlife Refuge, the same improper land management that extirpated the Bartram's hair streak has extirpated this butterfly. It used to fly in Richmond, Pineland. It doesn't fly there anymore, although there may be sufficient acreage available to restore it. That's a whole nother issue. And it used to fly at Davy Wells. It doesn't fly there anymore. I don't know what to say. This is one of those, unfortunately, improper land management, mostly beginning and ending with one thing, improper fire regimes. You can see that it's called a leaf wing. You almost always see it in the ventral side, the right-hand side. It's actually should properly be called Florida pine bark wing, okay? Because that appearance, if you know what the native pine tree looks like, it sloughs off its bark. So you have this bark sort of hanging on. That's what the butterfly looks like. And when it flies and lands on the side of a pine tree, it looks like sloughing bark. So it's a Florida dead leaf. Yeah. Anyway, the orange is spectacular. When it flies, you know what it is. I mean, it's an orange that's even more vibrant than Gulf Fritillary, Julias, Monarchs. None of them are confused with the orange of that Florida leafwing. It is dramatic. And it's a curious butterfly. It is a butterfly that's curious about the color orange. On several occasions, I've been hiking with the Salvados again, and my recommendation is always to wear something orange, an orange hat, an orange shirt. The butterfly will come out and circle around just to investigate. I don't know if that's males territorial. I don't know what it is. In fact, I didn't show the pictures. I have one where Holly Salvado took a picture of one that landed on Mark's hat. Okay, it's not a retiring butterfly. It's inquisitive and territorial. uh, but extraordinarily rare. Its host plant is, of course, the Pilean croton. So even though the Bartram's hairstreak and the Florida leafwing are not genetically related until you get to the top of the butterfly chain, they both only use, at least in Florida, that plant. Anyway, so that's the
This butterfly as an adult feeds on fruits, so that might be an issue in regards to protecting it, and that it needs to have access to fruit when it's an adult, while the Bartram hair streak is a nectar feeder. So it is thought, well, talking to Dr. Ridgely at Zoo Miami, that maybe its decline was due to a lack of fruit trees or just fruits available in the Richmond Pineland area. It's hypothesis, speculation and stuff, but that's what you need to consider in regards to this particular adult, the adult stage of this butterfly, fruits.
yes, and leafwings. The bigger populations of leafwings are do use fruit. I know, like in South Texas, for example, the Florida leafwing doesn't fly there, but related leafwings do, and the adults will. They don't nectar. I'm not sure what the right word is. They go to fruit, rotting fruit in particular. Okay, next one. Hey, our namesake. So what can I say? The Miami blue. Another one of the quandaries about this one is what happened to this species. It was not an uncommon butterfly in coastal southeastern Florida, wrapping around to parts of southwestern Florida. It did not occur in northern or central Florida, to our knowledge. It was not, and it's not an inland species. It's strictly coastal. Population totally collapsed. Thought it was extirpated from Florida. It has subspecies that fly in Cuba and other places in the Antilles. It was rediscovered in Bahia Honda. I want to say approximately 2000 plus or minus. That got everyone excited. There was an effort to do a restoration of the butterfly. Individuals were captured, and a captive breeding program was set up in Gainesville at the University of Florida by Dr. Daniels. It was highly successful in terms of test tube babies. They were able to grow hundreds, if not thousands of them. So that was not the limiting feature. They were released in 3 or 4 locations, the closest of which was Elliott Key, northern Elliott Key. Also in the Keys, despite the fact that the Florida Mosquito Control District sued the University of Florida and the trustees for attempting to shut down the economy of the Keys by releasing this butterfly. If everyone's interested in seeing the complaint, it's a fascinating read of how government can get carried away. And one of the strongest governments in the state of Florida is the Florida Keys Mosquito Control District. They're independently elected, so they're not part of the commissioners or the trustees. I'm not sure what their title is, are elected. And believe me, the Florida Keys spray. And when they spray everything. There was a big fight. They filed a lawsuit. It settled. They didn't want these wolves released into the wild because it could destroy the Keys. That's what the complaint says. In fact, it got so outrageous that they decided to do a test of the efficacy of mosquito control on the Miami blue, and they did an experiment. It ended up being a high schooler could have done a better job, but they got captive Miami blues, not related, not genetically related, Serranus blue, which is in the same genus, common. They got Miami blues, and they brought them to Ocean Reef, put them in cages, and flew planes over the cages and dropped the poison to figure out whether or not it would kill the butterflies. Of course, it killed the butterflies. Of course, the other thing, here's the ultimate irony. Mosquito spraying is a art, not a science, and it's driven in large part, its effectiveness by wind. So what appears to be the wind blowing here today would not be a day to spray for mosquitoes because it's too windy. You go a few thousand feet or a few hundred feet, you have a different wind current than you have at the ground. So it's a little bit like saturation bombing in World War II. You just have to get close and hope that, that you're effective. Truck spraying is much more effective. So when they spray off of trucks, that's much more localized, but bombing. So what they found is they had observers out there. They had real Miami blues, not any surrogates, to make sure that that it would kill Miami blues, because I don't want to talk about Serranus blue, they're cousins. And what they found is when they went back, they had both caterpillars and adults in these little cages. About half of them, the butterflies had gotten away. Okay. They couldn't document any butterfly in the container. Some of them were dead. Some weren't dead. They couldn't figure out. Some were dead that were off-site. Some were alive where they sprayed. And all they could conclude was that the poison had wafted off-site and contaminated other areas. So that was the great Miami blue test as to whether mosquito spraying killed Miami blues. I mean, any idiot knows that, of course, it will kill them if properly applied, but the mosquito control district had to confirm it. So the politics, I know it's shocking, is involved heavily on where to reintroduce these. And part of the problem is they are reintroduced in areas that are not obvious. One of the most difficult places to go to in Dade County is northern Elliott Key. Think about it. It's a wet landing. Okay. I mean, you have to drive your boat there, get out and wade on. You can go to the southern part of Elliott Key and go up Spite Highway if you've got a transportation to get there and you're willing to put up with mosquitoes. The problem is they released hundreds of them there and they came back months later and they didn't find any. And so the problem is what happened? Well, nobody knows because there was nobody there to watch. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but it's wrong. Okay, if you're going to release something like that, it's pretty well known that at least other blues, you almost have to camp out there and figure out what went wrong. Mary has a question. Jason may know more than I do about that, so I'm going to give him the microphone, and then I'll give you my 2 cents worth. The question is about Miami Blues are well known to be not sponsors. What's the right word? There is a technical word which I can't possibly pronounce, but ants actually help protect the larvae of Miami Blues. So there's a relationship, symbiotic, because they give them so-called honeydew that the ants like, and so that's all good. Jason.
So that's a good question. I think it should be a dissertation in master's, because you could do a lot of studies with that. And honestly, so you're probably thinking of the twig ant and fire ants, right? So fire ants are really aggressive. Dr. Copter actually has done experiments with fire ants and sulfur butterflies. She has it in the book actually. And the twig ant is another ant that's invasive. It could be a problem. I did stuff with the shouse, which do not interact well with ants. So that was easy. But for the Miami blue, it's a lot harder. But that's something that somebody should be doing. So there should be scientists or graduate students out there. And I think when you look at UF in particular, there's just so much to do that nobody has specifically targeted that type of research, because you could look at butterflies in Central Florida and the Panhandle. Of course, monarchs get most of the funding, and it's just a difficult project. But honestly, for hope, I've been working on this camera project with students at Miami-Dade College, and I think the easiest thing for anybody is just to stick cameras in front of these caterpillars. And you would have to have somebody watch the footage and stuff, but I think those answers could be um, resolved, solved, if people just put cameras around the caterpillars and figure it out. But nobody, but as not Mark, as Dennis has said, that requires somebody getting out to the islands, finding the caterpillars, setting up the cameras, replacing SD cards, watching the footage, doing it again and again. That probably will take a couple of years. So what you're asking are excellent questions that undergrads, master's students, and PhDs should pursue. I have nothing in regards to fire ants and twig ants, and from what I've read, they don't even know, like, if it's parasitoids, for example. Like, what happens with Miami blue caterpillars when there are no ants? Are parasitoids more aggressive? We don't know, and that's where cameras will come in.
Yeah, and to pick up, the old-fashioned way is to have someone camp out there. The new-fashioned way is to have cameras, right? But the point is they have to be monitored. You can't just go and release hundreds of them and come back 2 months later and wonder what happened. And that's what happened on Elliott Key. It happened. They did a release. If you head to Flamingo, just before you go across the Buttonwood Canal, they did a release in there. Again, and there was one other location, Long Pine Key. But the beginning problem is there's no continuous monitoring. So what happens is you come back and they're all gone. And it's what happened. One thought was to do what I think, this is what I call it. I think they use this head starting, where they put them in large cages. Imagine a cage, a third of the size of this room, on site, where they're going to release them so that the butterflies become acclimated, or the caterpillars, all that, and there's excluding predators to sort of get them used to the environment, and then you release them. I don't know that that's ever been done. I know there was talk about it. There was talk about doing it. I was pushing hard. This is more than 10 years ago, to have them released on Key Biscayne, Bill Baggs. And I felt free in volunteering you to go and be the monitors and figure out what's going on. I said, I've got people who will go and sit there and watch these caterpillars negotiating between the state of Florida, the University of Florida, the federal government. There were two state, DEP and the State Parks Department, plus the university, plus the federal government, Fish and Wildlife Service. I can't tell you how difficult that is. Okay. It is impossible. Okay. And once you finally get the deal, they discontinued the captive rearing. So there was no available. They've started it again. Like I say, it appears to me, I'm not a scientist, to let facts get in the way. I'm a lawyer. It appears that there is something that's restricting. It's not habitat loss. People say it's habitat loss. That is not what has destroyed this species. There's enough habitat. There's enough gray knickerbean that one of the 2 or 3 plants this species uses, gray knickerbean. You couldn't get rid of all the gray knickerbean if you wanted to. Okay, there's that much gray knickerbean. Okay. I assume everyone knows that it's the ultimate anti-personnel plant. I mean, it has thorns on its thorns. Okay. If you ever have gone into gray knickerbean, I know you haven't because you're here. Okay. You cannot get out. Okay. It is impossible to eradicate. So it's not it's not the availability of a host plant. It may be the availability of the proper ant species. We don't know. It is a very difficult challenge. Like I say, unlike the Bartrams and the leafwing, it's not host plant. It's not lack of territory. Yes, it's reduced. There's not as much coastal real estate as there used to be. I get that. There are more condominiums, but there's still a lot of gray knickerbean out there. Linda has a question. Oh, to a native wasp. Yeah. So the part of the problem, and I'm venting, but part of the problem is politics dictate where the species is, where the captive releases occur, and those aren't often the places that are the most opportune places to release it. So it ends up being a negotiation. So you've got, what could go wrong? You have to put it in the right place. Often the right place means inaccessibility. Inaccessibility means inability to monitor. Inability to monitor means inability to determine what went wrong. And so I think everyone would say, yes, we need to have a captive breeding program. And like I say, ironically, they can raise thousands of these things. I mean, that is not the problem. There may be a problem in terms of genetic isolation and having a restrictive gene pool. That's an issue. But historically, they've been able to raise thousands of them in Gainesville. But there's something that goes wrong once they're released. Okay. And no one quite knows what it is. And then you add in the fact that you've got, you can only release them in certain areas. You have to negotiate. Some of the areas you put them in, you would think, well, let's put them in an area where we don't spray for mosquitoes. Good idea. Brilliant. Let's think about it. That eliminates a lot of places, including a lot of state parks are sprayed. Not all of them, a lot of them. Does it have the right ant population? Does it have the right, are there too many parasitic wasps? Okay. No one knows. It's a complicated issue, and it's not just as simple as, well, we just need to raise more when we release them. I think everybody's in favor of that, but remember the Einstein statement, right? To do the same thing over and over and getting the bad result is insanity. Okay. We keep doing the same thing over and over. In a way, is it best to do something or to let the species fail? Yes, it's best to do something. We know that. But what we're doing, I'm not highly confident. And I'm not criticizing the scientists. They're restricted by the politics of what's going on. And they are, if you think they're bad in Dade County, go to Monroe County and deal with the Florida Keys Mosquito Control District. That is one bear of operation. Yeah.
The good news is that they're doing well in Cuba. So all the butterflies that Dennis has mentioned have much larger populations in Andros Island, Cuba, Turks and Caicos. So even if they wink out here, they could build up their populations there and then just wait for a hurricane to blow them back over to the Keys.
Hello, hello.
Susan, why don't you just speak?
Yeah, there's a different subspecies in Cuba. The Miami blue here's are called
Are there any
Bethune
actually
bakerans.
in the Florida Keys that have not been put there?
Can you repeat the question again?
Are there any can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Are there any actually Miami blues left in the wild?
The ones that I'm aware of, I'll use the word restored population in Long Key and
No,
in the Keys.
that is not correct.
All right, then there's not. They were released.
Well, I monitored the ones that were in Long Key State Park for a year and a half. And every time they had more, I'd come and look at them, or even if they didn't bring them, I'd go and survey them. I surveyed them weekly, and And I never in that whole year and a half saw more than 2 adults that weren't marked. So
Interesting.
there were 2, the one was a male and one was a female, and they were 3 months apart.
Interesting.
So I
Do
believe,
you have any idea how many were released there?
hundreds over the time, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? They would tell me, well, we released some last week, so I'd know, but I'd look for the markings, and sometimes they were put into tents. And my problem with reintroduction, and I don't know if anybody can tell me anything about this, but my problem with reintroductions is it seems like you're putting something back where you don't know why they disappeared to start with.
Well, that was my Einstein quote.
Oh, sorry, I missed some of
Yeah.
this. So,
Yeah, you're
but
right. We don't know. Clearly, it's not host plant availability, which is the typical thing. It's not loss of habitat in a sense. That's the same comment. There's something else going on that caused the collapse that is limiting feature on the ability to restore it. It's not the availability. Linda Evans just asked, are there inbred populations such that it's not doesn't have ability to reproduce? I don't know. I would think at UF they know what they're doing, and they're releasing butterflies that are capable of reproducing. Well, there is no natural population, but the short. Oh, sure, absolutely, yeah. Well, I guess the only other place I know of is the infamous Marquesas, which is going through a tropical storm right now.
They haven't been seen there for over 2.5 years.
So then you've answered the question. They're no longer flying in Florida.
Well, that's why I was asking it. I didn't know what the deal was, if there was some going on that I didn't know about.
No,
But I
uh,
see the same thing when they reintroduced shouse. They reintroduced them at Lignum Vitae Key, and they saw one. They haven't seen any this year. And they saw one the year before, and I think we saw a few the year before that, but there had been pupa left there. You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
but they never saw a second generation.
Yeah, I think there's some question. I don't know enough of the history, even about the reintroductions of looping all the way back to the first butterfly chouses. There's some question about the efficacy of what was reintroduced on the Elliott Key 20 years ago, 40 years ago. Again, I don't know the answer. Some people say it had nothing to, that was all a waste of time and effort, and that we're on their ephemeral population right on the edge of its geographic range, and it comes and goes. And what we do, other than let's not kill them with poison, there's not a whole lot we can do. Okay. And that restoration through reintroduction is not the solution. But some people argue that. Again, it's hard not to do something, okay, and let it just wink out. But again, circulating back to the Miami Blue, it's been 25 years, and they've tried to do restoration efforts. And again, it's easy to criticize, what hasn't worked, but everything that's been done hasn't worked. So
Right.
not quite sure what the limiting feature is. And I don't know, I'll reach out. Have you talked to Jarrett Daniels about if there's still an extant population?
Oh, the Miami Blues?
Yes.
No, the last time that I heard was from Taylor,
Okay.
who works for him.
Yeah.
So he said he hadn't seen any. And 2 years ago, actually quite a while ago, I don't even know if it could be more than 6 months ago. So.
All right. Well, on that, we have one more.
I mean, look at the Florida Whites. We hadn't seen them in like 6 years, and all of a sudden we had a great year last year or the year before, whichever one it was. So sometimes things just seem to blink out and then show up. So
Yeah.
why this year such a light shouse year? I don't know.
Right. Well, clearly we're on the, like I said, we're on the edge for a lot of those. You know, whether restoration is the way to do it or not, I'm not quite sure. And
She is Florida Keys expert and leads most of the Shaw Swallowtail surveys every single year. I tell you, every butterfly, every bird, every plant, every living, every night. She's even had a life.
the final butterfly, which I feel a little uncomfortable talking about since we have experts that know a lot more than I do about this one, other than everyone knows the Atala. And again, butterfly restoration is complicated. This is one that's again driven by a single, I'll say a single host plant, depending on what newspaper you read. They're running amok nearby at the Montgomery Foundation, but the coontie and the destruction of the coontie, you know, which was at one time by far one of the most common plants in Dade County before civilization showed up and destroyed the overwhelming population. And with that went the Atala. And the good news is with the restoration of coonties in backyards and other places, that there's been a lot of restoration of this butterfly, and it had nothing to do with the government. They didn't get involved. It's not an endangered species. It's totally recovered thanks to backyard, in my opinion, backyard gardeners. It's a little more expansive. You know, we have one of our members and officers is a Atala, I don't know, what are you, midwife? I don't know, something to that effect. And what's that? Order. Right. So Roger Hammer rediscovered this in Virginia Key. And it was, you know, thought to be extirpated from Florida. It flies in the Bahamas. I'm not sure elsewhere or not, but Cuba as well, but certainly the Bahamas. And lots of work's been done on this. Sandy Coy, who I think may be on the line, you know, has a doctoral thesis on this. So it's gotten lots of publicity. It's a showy butterfly. It's a beautiful butterfly. It's a recovery success story, and apparently was relatively simple. You plant the right plant, and you'll get enough of it. And famous last words, you'll get the butterfly. It's not quite that simple. They're a little more ephemeral, but it's as simple as it can be in terms of planting plants and expecting something to show up. Unlike the Miami blue and the Florida leafwing and others like that are much more complicated in terms of restoration. So I don't know, anyone has any
Dennis, I just sent a paper out. I sent one to you as well. This is a newly published paper as of yesterday on the Atala butterfly and the recovery and the data set that so many of our members participated in one way or another, some of them in every way. But anyway, so that paper is available, and Adam, feel free to post that on the website. But yeah, so it is people who have helped this butterfly recover. And the only thing, like you had mentioned, the feds, they never touched it because they thought it was gone in 1973 when the Endangered Species Act was passed. So they never touched it, which thank God. If they hadn't, Roger and all of us would be in trouble. So yeah, so it's wonderful. It's because of the people, all of you. Thank you.
That's Sandy Coy, and Sandy just referenced that she sent a scientific paper. We'll post it on our website. And people, if you don't go to our website, you should go there, because what we try to do is post information that appears, scientific literature, newspaper articles from other parts of the country that are talking either about South Florida butterflies or butterflies in general. So there's a lot of stuff that we try to post that I would like to think people appreciate reading. There was an article in the Miami Herald about a month ago about, I was making a joke about, there was a newspaper reporter who was saying that the Montgomery Foundation is, they have problems because the Atala larvae are eating all their rare cycads.
Ashley, the young woman who wrote that article had the butterfly in her yard, and but she's supposed to be a climate change person, and I'm putting that in quotations. But at any rate, that's why she got involved at all. And Montgomery does have a problem. If you're a cycad person, these cycads are thousands of dollars, and so of course they're very concerned about the health of their plants.
Yeah, my only dispute with that is that the implication is that they are somehow destroying native cycads, where it says are rare Miami plants. They're
True.
plants from somewhere else.
True that.
Okay, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be protecting them, but they are not our rare. They are not rare Florida plants. Okay, they're rare in the world, right? Yeah. And thanks, Sandy, for sending that and giving us permission. We'll make sure that gets posted on our website.
Thank you.
But this is an example. Again, as you can see, these restoration efforts are complicated and they are not uniform. And what works for one species simply doesn't work for another. And sometimes we don't even know the combination. Even if we had the political will and the money, we still don't know what the solution is for some of these. And we need to find out about Miami blues and what's going on there. Because again, if there is one species that has had the government at every level all over it, it is the Miami blue. Okay. I mean, I can't think of one species that has had more government involvement, whether it's the Fish and Wildlife Service, the University of Florida State Parks Department, Department of Environmental Protection, Disney, everything. Anyway, I think that's it. Do I have any more? I think that's, yeah. So thank you. And thanks to everybody on here in the audience and also on Zooming in. Good
Thank you for
comments.
making it Zoom.
Yeah, I appreciate, again, there's lots of people. The good news about our organization, lots of people that know lots of things about individual species. And it's a very useful opportunity to just sit down and talk about, what we can do as a group to sort of help each one of these species. And each one has a different formula. Some of them we don't even know the formula, but we need to be focused on that. I don't know, questions or comments? I know we've had a lot of dialogue, which is good. All right. Thanks again, folks. Our next meeting is in November. And I appreciate the folks from Zoom. We appreciate your comments. Very useful to the organization and to the meeting.